Hello everyone and welcome back to a brand new video. Ignition Zone is a channel that focuses on LEGO and Bionicle content. If that type of thing is your thing, then please feel free to hit the like button and subscribe. And without further ado, we are getting into the tier list for every single Bionicle movie. We are not including Journey to One on here. That is a Netflix show, but even if it was on here, it would automatically go at the bottom. So with that out of the way, we will get into it one by one by release order. So, Bionicle Mask of Light, the movie. If you are not already aware of the Bionicle story, and you start with this movie, you will be lost. Not that the previous story elements are super important for this narrative, as the prime focus is on Takua and his journey, along with Jala. There's a lot of stuff that happens before this, and I think that this is the easiest way to confuse someone by introducing them into Bionicle is if you jump them into this movie. At the very least of two, it establishes everything from the ground up. And if you do happen to start with the third film, then it gives you a little bit of a recap on two so you don't miss too much. But you miss two whole important story years for Bionicle. That includes the big build-up with Makuta as the main villain and Takua's arc as a whole. So outside of that, it is actually a well-paced movie. It's very similar to like Fellowship of the Ring, Lord of the Rings a little bit. There's a lot of parallels there with the Ring Wraiths and the Rakshi and the Mask of Light being, I don't even have to explain it. They're both gold. Mask of Light did also bring in a lot of brand new elements to Bionicle, such as the Miramax design language style, which many people are generally pretty okay with. I know a lot of people that do not like it, like one bit, but I mean, that's your taste. We still have the sets to refer to. I think more of these designs hit than they miss. I'll say that first. And the soundtrack is also just fantastic. Nathan First really carried the movie with that. Even the directors in the commentary were like, we are so lucky that we had this guy on the movie. It really made it what it was. There are a few very minor animation mistakes, but overall, a good watch. As a kid, this was never my favorite one. I actually saw the second one first as a kid, and then I saw 3. I think I saw 2, and then 3, and then 1. So, I got the backwards experience, the chronological order experience, but when it comes to Bionicle's story, and if you start with the movies, it's probably not the best move anyway. Where does Mask of Light fall on this little tier list here? I'm going to put it into the B category right here. It's definitely a vibe, and it's a fun watch if you know everything about that 01 to 03 Golden Age era for Bionicle. It was meant to serve almost as a finale. And overall, as a finale, it works quite well. There's lots of fan service moments in there. The takanuva have fantastic voices. That's the other thing, too. All of these films have pretty good voices, definitely. More so the Miramax trilogy, but that's mainly just because the voices in the Legend Reborn aren't as memorable, in my opinion. But yeah, that's where Mask of Light will fall into third place, otherwise known as the B category here. Now, the next one is Bionicle Legends of Metru. Now, this was the first Bionicle film that I saw, and this was my first introduction into the Bionicle story back in 2006, so I was a couple years late to this movie. But in terms of this movie itself, it's definitely the most complete narrative for sure. However, in terms of the canon, there are some events that were cut out of the film that are in the comics, that are also in the novels, but you never really feel that those elements are missing from the movie. The only thing that relies on this movie having a 2 in its name is your pre-established knowledge of Makuta, because it plays on you knowing Makuta from the original film and from other parts of the Bionicle story. But when you watch the film, and you haven't seen those other ones or read those other ones or whatever, then the Makuta reveal is a little bit out of nowhere compared to Tragaduma just going bad. So that's really the only downer of starting with this one as your first Bionicle film. But the voice acting is very good, the designs are also quite good. They actually quite improved upon the official LEGO designs for the Titans of this wave, and they added unique secondary color accents to the Metru that reflect very similar to their Turaga variants. Like I said, this one is probably the most complete narrative out of all of these, so I will put this one in the S tier. This is the best Bionicle film for sure. And to follow up Bionicle 2, we have Bionicle 3. Bionicle 3 is a lot better in some aspects than Bionicle 2. This came out in 2005, which was the same year as Revenge of the Sith, so they share some similar plot elements, only this one has the happier ending. I'm not sure if that was on purpose, I'm not sure if that was a coincidence on LEGO's part. LEGO does have the Star Wars IP in their library at this point, so maybe they knew something that we didn't, so they had Bionicle do something similar. It's entirely possible. But I would say the writing, in terms of the characterization of the villains like Rudaka, Sidorak, they are very well written characters. And there's almost like some borderline like mature writing going on with the way that Rudaka manipulates the entire plot of the movie. The Kitangu stuff is not entirely interesting, but just like with Bionicle 2, there are missing elements from the story in Bionicle 3, like the whole mission of the Makoki Stone. Canonically, it doesn't really make sense when you watch the movie, because it doesn't really feel like there was a missing story there, but in the canon, they're like, well, no, actually this happened and this happened too, within the movie itself. While in Bionicle 2, they at the very least sped through some of those stories and alluded to them, like with Vakama being all tied up. But as I said before, they do a good job of recapping the events of Bionicle 2, in case if you did not watch Bionicle 2, so you won't be totally lost in watching this. You get a sense of how the characters are at the beginning. You see a change in Vakama, and then he quickly relapses when his leadership is put into question after already having to prove himself in Bionicle 2. The soundtrack is probably the least memorable out of the original Miramax trilogy. But overall, Bionicle 3 definitely feels the most like a movie. Though its shortcomings stop it from being the best one. So with that being said, it is going into the A tier. Very good film, a very good Bionicle film. The last one we have on the list is Bionicle the Legend Reborn. And I'll just put it right here. I watched this movie a good amount of times. I've obviously seen the previous ones more. This movie starts with the biggest plot twist in Bionicle G1, and that is Makuta taking over the Madanui Great Spirit robot. And it introduces you to Madanui as a character. So in terms of setting up the main plot and the character, it does a pretty fine job of that. It doesn't really give you a recap of the story, because that would just be way too much information for one movie. And the way that LEGO was treating Bionicle's audience at the time is that they just assumed that they remembered everything from the main story. Something that people are quick to say is better than the original trilogy are the designs. And I'll say that the company that made The Legend Reborn, it was not Miramax, by the way, they had a lot less overhauling to do with designs in terms of trying to make them look more, I guess, humanistic to communicate emotion and stuff like that. Like, they're set accurate, but they already had things like hands, so again, a lot less work to be done. It's almost like the Glatorian were designed with a film in mind versus the previous sets. So that's a very subjective thing. I mean, like, all film criticism is subjective, of course. However, when it comes to the designs themselves, that's up to you of which designs you prefer overall. But there is no denying that the soundtrack is definitely not as good as the previous trilogy of films. And the other thing is, too, is that this one gets boring very, very fast. Which is ironic, because you're introduced to entirely all new characters. This is the first time we've met Madanui as a character and not being presented like a god or an entity. We are introduced to Gresh, we're introduced to Akar, we're introduced to Kina, Barracks, and frankly, an entire new world in the Bionicle universe. And I guess you can kind of blame LEGO and the studio for thinking that they were going to make 2 more of these movies, but this movie obviously did not do very, very well. And not to mention that 2009 set a lot of stuff up that they didn't realize that they had to rush for the years to come. And also, the villains are a little bit more comical this time around. Before this, you had Makuta, that was basically like the devil. Evil guy in the shadows, very threatening. Straight up kills characters that we like. He's shown to be very intelligent. He has a lot of power, physical threat, and also is quite manipulative. And even when Makuta wasn't in the Miramax films, we at least had Rudaka, who was puppeteering everyone. But when it comes to the antagonists in this film, you are handed Tuma, and Tuma is, yeah, there's not much to say about Tuma. All what Tuma is the physical threat, but he's not really mentioned a whole lot until like towards the end of the movie, just for there to be a final fight. Then you have the betrayal of Metis, and I guess he was supposed to be, you know, the other side to the antagonistic force of like the one manipulating everything, but there wasn't a whole lot of foreshadowing. He's just the guy that finds Madanui in the desert, and then he kind of just leaves for a little while. He has a cool little vehicle that isn't actually his in the set. And then we see him again, and he's like a bad guy. And he gets turned into a snake, which is kind of cool. But overall, The Legend Reborn is definitely the weakest of the Bionicle movies. Now, you can let me know in the comments, do you agree with this list? Would you change anything? Do you think The Legend Reborn is better than any of these movies? Let me know, and we can talk about it. But until then, I'll catch you in the next one.